The mop hit the linoleum with a wet slap that echoed through the empty hangar at 3:47 hours. Lieutenant Commander Raven Nightfall Delacroix squeezed the gray strands methodically, watching dirty water swirl down the drain like her career had 6 months ago. The punishment detail was supposed to break her spirit, the base psychiatrist's recommendation after the inquiry. Instead, it gave her time to think about the night everything changed over the Hormuz Strait. Well, well, look what we have here. The voice carried that particular brand of arrogance that made Raven's jaw tighten without looking up. She knew before turning around that she'd see dress whites, ribbons arranged in perfect rows, and the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. What she hadn't expected was the seal trident gleaming on his chest. Commander Marcus Thorne, he introduced himself, though his reputation had preceded him into every ready room from Coronado to Norfolk. Heard they had you pushing a mop now. Shame what happened to the great Nightfall. The way he said her call sign made it sound like a joke. Most people assumed it came from her night vision skills or her preference for dawn patrols. They were wrong, but she'd never corrected them. The real story was locked away with classified after-action reports that would never see daylight. "Just doing my job, Commander," she replied, returning to the mop. The hangar stretched around them like a cathedral of aviation history. FA-18 Super Hornets lined up in perfect formation, their gray skin reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. Each aircraft represented millions of dollars and years of training. Each pilot who flew them carried the weight of American air superiority on their shoulders. She'd been one of them once. Thorne stepped closer, his boots clicking against the wet floor. "I'm putting together a team for something off the books, something that requires someone who can fly low, fast, and completely invisible. Word is you used to be good at that." Used to be. The words tasted bitter. "The mission brief is tomorrow at 600, Building 47, Sublevel 3, if you're interested in proving that call sign wasn't just Navy PR bullshit." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Delacroix, bring your flight suit. You'll need it." The silence that followed his departure felt heavier than the humid Virginia air. Raven stood motionless, mop handle gripped tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Outside, a C-130 Hercules rumbled across the tarmac, its 4 turboprops cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. 6 months of mopping floors, filing reports, and pretending not to hear the whispers in the officers' mess. 6 months of everyone treating her like damaged goods. But Marcus Thorne didn't know the full story. Nobody did. The mission over the strait had gone sideways when her wingman, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, call sign Prophet, took a surface-to-air missile meant for a civilian airliner. She'd made a choice that night that saved 347 innocent lives but cost the Navy a pilot and $20 million in aircraft. The investigation cleared her of wrongdoing, but it also grounded her indefinitely pending psychological evaluation. The mop clattered to the floor as she walked toward the hangar doors. Through the massive opening, she could see the first hint of dawn painting the eastern horizon purple and gold. Her reflection in the glass looked foreign, hair pulled back in regulation, face thinner than it used to be, eyes that had seen too much and slept too little. Building 47 sat on the far side of the base, a nondescript concrete structure that officially housed administrative offices. Everyone knew the real business happened underground, in rooms that didn't appear on any blueprint. If Thorne was calling a meeting there, whatever he had planned was either highly classified or completely insane. Possibly both. She thought about Prophet's last transmission. "Nightfall, I'm hit bad. Take the shot. Take the damn shot." The civilian Airbus had been dropping altitude fast, its starboard engine trailing black smoke from the missile fragment that should have hit its fuel tanks. 200 meters below, she'd had a clear firing solution on the Iranian patrol boat that launched the SAM. Instead, she'd broken formation and gone for the rescue. The decision haunted her dreams, but she'd make it again. Walking back to her quarters, Raven passed the memorial wall where Prophet's name had been added 3 weeks after the incident. Lieutenant Jacob Prophet Morrison, 1989-2024, naval aviator. The brass plate reflected her face like an accusation. She'd saved a plane full of civilians, but she hadn't saved her wingman. Her quarters were spartanly furnished, regulation bunk, metal desk, single window overlooking the airfield. The walls were bare except for a single photograph, her navy wings of gold ceremony, Prophet grinning beside her in his dress whites. They'd been inseparable through flight school, two kids from nowhere who'd earned the right to call themselves naval aviators. The clock read 4:23, 3.5 hours until the briefing. Raven opened her closet and pulled out the flight suit that had been gathering dust for 6 months. The patches were still there, her name tape, squadron insignia, and the small black Raven emblem that marked her as Nightfall. The fabric smelled faintly of jet fuel and salt air, memories of a life she'd been forced to abandon. As she laid the suit across her bunk, something crinkled in the chest pocket. Her fingers found a folded piece of paper, Prophet's last letter, written 3 days before the mission. She'd read it so many times the creases were worn soft as fabric. "Ray," it began, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "If you're reading this, something went sideways and I didn't make it home. Don't blame yourself. We both knew the risks when we strapped on these wings. Just remember what we promised each other back in Pensacola. We fly so others don't have to. Whatever comes next, make it count." The letter trembled in her hands as dawn light crept through her window. Outside, the base was coming alive. Ground crews performing pre-flight inspections, pilots walking toward the ready rooms with coffee and determination. The rhythm of military aviation that had been her heartbeat for 12 years. Marcus Thorne thought he was giving her a chance to prove herself. He had no idea that she'd already proven everything that mattered on a dark night over the Persian Gulf, when she chose to save strangers instead of following orders. The question wasn't whether she could still fly. It was whether she could live with the consequences of flying again. The Super Hornets outside gleamed like silver bullets in the morning sun, each one a testament to American engineering and pilot skill. She'd logged over 3,000 hours in various naval aircraft, from the trainer T-6 Texan II to the lethal FA-18E. Flying wasn't just her job, it was her identity, carved into her DNA like the double helix itself. But identity could be rebuilt, like aircraft after combat damage. Raven folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the chest pocket where Prophet's words would stay close to her heart. Whatever Thorne had planned, whatever off-the-books mission required someone who could fly low, fast, and completely invisible, she would face it the same way she'd faced everything else in her career, with skill, determination, and the memory of a friend who believed in doing what was right even when it cost everything. The mirror above her sink showed a reflection she barely recognized anymore. The confident naval aviator had been replaced by someone harder, more weathered by experience and loss. But behind those tired eyes, something else flickered, a spark of the pilot who'd earned her wings through sheer force of will and had never backed down from a challenge. Marcus Thorne wanted proof that her call sign was real. He was about to get more than he bargained for. Building 47 looked exactly like what it was designed to look like, boring government architecture that discouraged curiosity. Raven approached the main entrance at 5:55, flight suit crisp and boots polished to mirror shine. Her reflection in the glass doors showed someone ready for duty, but her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the handle. The security checkpoint required 2 forms of ID and a retinal scan. The guard, a young Marine corporal, checked her name against a list and nodded professionally. "Sublevel 3, ma'am, elevators down the hall." The descent felt longer than 3 floors, her ears popping as if she were climbing to altitude. When the doors opened, she found herself in a corridor lined with doors marked only by numbers. Room 347 waited at the end, its steel surface scarred by years of use and the weight of classified conversations. She knocked twice and entered without waiting for permission. The room was smaller than expected, dominated by a conference table surrounded by 6 chairs. Marcus Thorne sat at the head, still wearing dress whites but with his jacket removed and sleeves rolled up. Maps covered every surface, satellite imagery of coastlines, topographical charts, and aerial photographs marked with red circles and arrows. "Punctual," he observed, checking his watch. "Good, have a seat." Raven chose the chair directly across from him, close enough to read his expression but far enough to maintain tactical distance. The maps showed geography she recognized: the eastern Mediterranean, specifically the Syrian coastline near Latakia. Russian naval facilities were marked with precision that suggested recent intelligence gathering. "Before we begin," Thorne said, leaning forward with his hands clasped, "I need to know if you're here because you're bored or because you still believe you're a pilot." The question hung in the air like ordnance waiting to explode. Raven met his gaze steadily, remembering Prophet's words about making it count. "I'm here because a Navy SEAL questioned my abilities in my own hangar. That tends to get my attention." "Your abilities," he laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lieutenant Commander, your last mission resulted in the loss of a $20 million aircraft and the death of your wingman. Your psychological evaluation recommends permanent grounding. Your commanding officer has you mopping floors because he doesn't trust you with anything more complex than janitorial duties." Each word hit like anti-aircraft fire, tearing through her composure with surgical precision. But Raven had learned to absorb damage and keep flying. "My last mission saved 347 civilian lives. The aircraft loss was unavoidable. My wingman died because he chose to take a missile meant for innocent people." "Chosen narrative," Thorne replied dismissively. "The real story is that you broke formation, disobeyed direct orders, and prioritized emotions over military objectives. That's not a pilot, that's a liability." The silence stretched between them like a no-man's land. Outside the windowless room, the building hummed with ventilation systems and fluorescent lights, but inside, the only sound was Raven's controlled breathing. She could leave now, walk back to her mop and bucket, finish out her career in obscurity. That's what everyone expected. Instead, she stood and walked to the map table, studying the Syrian coastline with professional interest. "Russian S-400 missiles here," she said, pointing to a marked position. "Naval infantry base here. Airfield with MiG-29s and Su-30s here. If you're planning what I think you're planning, you'll need someone who can thread the needle between all three without lighting up every radar from Damascus to Moscow." Thorne's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, surprise masked by years of operational security training. "What makes you think this is operational and not academic?" "Because academic briefings happen in classrooms, not in rooms that don't officially exist." She traced a finger along the coastline, identifying approach vectors and potential threats. "Plus, you specifically asked for someone who flies low, fast, and completely invisible. That's not training language, that's mission requirement." For the first time since entering the room, Marcus Thorne smiled genuinely. "You're sharper than your file suggests." "My file is incomplete." She returned to her seat but remained standing, a subtle power play that shifted the room's dynamics. "What's the mission?" Thorne reached into his briefcase and withdrew a tablet computer. The screen showed satellite imagery time-stamped from 48 hours earlier, a Syrian military compound with unusual activity patterns. 3 days ago, a Syrian chemical weapons facility suffered what local media reported as an industrial accident. 12 people died, including 2 Russian advisors. The Syrians claim it was a boiler explosion. "But," Raven prompted, "but our signals intelligence suggests otherwise. Someone hit that facility with precision munitions, targeting specific buildings while leaving others untouched. The chemical signatures match weapons-grade nerve agents that were supposed to have been destroyed under international agreements." The pieces fell together like a tactical puzzle. Someone's still manufacturing chemical weapons, and someone else just sent a message about it. Exactly. The problem is that the someone else appears to be Israeli, based on aircraft signatures detected by Turkish radar. But the Israelis deny involvement, and our diplomatic channels confirm they had no operations in the area that night. Raven studied the satellite imagery with growing understanding. The attack pattern showed professional military planning, approach routes that avoided radar coverage, target selection that demonstrated intimate knowledge of the facility's layout, and withdrawal vectors that suggested careful consideration of Syrian air defenses. So either the Israelis are lying, she said slowly, or someone else has access to Israeli aircraft and operational intelligence. The third option is that someone wants us to believe the Israelis are lying. Thorne swiped to another image, radar tracks showing aircraft movement patterns. These are the approach routes our satellites detected. Single aircraft, flying below radar coverage until the final attack run. The pilot was good enough to avoid Syrian, Russian, and Turkish air defenses while hitting targets with surgical precision. The flight profile made Raven's pulse quicken despite herself. The approach required skills that few pilots possessed, terrain following at night, electronic warfare countermeasures, and the kind of precision bombing that demanded perfect timing and nerves of steel. What type of aircraft? Unknown. The radar signature was intermittent, suggesting advanced stealth capabilities or someone who knows how to exploit radar gaps. The ordnance was precise enough to suggest laser-guided munitions, but the delivery method remains classified above your current clearance level. The implication hung between them like a challenge. Raven's clearance had been downgraded after the Persian Gulf incident, another consequence of her decision to prioritize civilian lives over military protocol. But her flight experience included exactly the kind of low-level penetration missions Thorne was describing. "You want me to identify the aircraft," she said. "I want you to fly the same route and tell me how it could be done." He closed the tablet and leaned back in his chair. Unofficially, of course, training exercise only. The word training carried implications that both of them understood. Training exercises weren't subject to the same oversight as operational missions. Training exercises could be conducted with minimal documentation and maximum flexibility. Training exercises allowed for creative interpretation of rules and regulations. "What aircraft?" she asked. "Modified F-16 Falcon, stripped down for stealth and equipped with advanced electronic warfare systems. Single seat, extended range, configured for precision strike missions." His eyes never left her face as he delivered the information. The kind of aircraft that requires a pilot with exceptional skill and questionable judgment. The insult was delivered so smoothly that it took a moment to register. But Raven had endured 6 months of similar comments, each one designed to break her spirit and convince her to accept defeat gracefully. Instead, they'd forged her resolve like metal in a furnace. "When do we start?" she asked. Marcus Thorne's smile was sharp as a blade. "We start now." The modified F-16 sat in a hangar that officially didn't exist at an airfield that wasn't on any public map. Raven ran her hands along the aircraft's fuselage, feeling the subtle differences that marked it as something special. The skin was darker than standard gray, treated with radar-absorbing materials that gave it an almost organic texture. The cockpit had been redesigned with advanced displays and controls that looked more like science fiction than military hardware. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Thorne appeared beside her, now dressed in unmarked flight gear. "We call her Ghost Rider officially. She's a test bed for next-generation avionics. Unofficially, she's the most advanced tactical fighter in the American inventory." Raven circled the aircraft with professional interest, noting the modifications that had been made. The air intakes had been redesigned for reduced radar signature. The weapons pylons were reconfigured for internal storage. Even the pilot's seat had been upgraded with systems she didn't recognize. "Who else knows about this?" she asked. "Need-to-know basis, which currently includes you, me, and about 6 other people who will never admit this conversation happened." He handed her a flight suit marked only with generic patches. "The mission profile is simple: fly the route, avoid detection, identify potential vulnerabilities in Syrian air defenses, and return with actionable intelligence. And if something goes wrong, then you were never here. This aircraft doesn't exist, and I've never heard of anyone called Nightfall." The callousness of the statement should have bothered her more than it did. But Raven had learned that in the world of special operations, plausible deniability was as important as ammunition and fuel. The pilots who flew these missions understood that they operated beyond the normal safety net of military bureaucracy. She accepted the flight suit and walked toward the crew quarters to change. The fabric felt different than her normal gear, lighter but somehow more substantial, as if it had been engineered for purposes beyond standard flight operations. The patches were generic enough to belong to any test pilot program, but the material itself suggested capabilities she could only guess at. When she emerged, Thorne was reviewing flight charts with 2 technicians who looked more like computer programmers than traditional ground crew. Their conversation stopped when she approached, but she caught enough fragments to understand that they were discussing electronic warfare parameters and something called signature management protocols. "Ready?" Thorne asked, dismissing the technicians with a nod. Raven strapped herself into the cockpit with practiced efficiency, but every system she touched was different from any aircraft she'd flown before. The heads-up display showed information in configurations she'd never seen. The flight controls responded with precision that felt almost supernatural. Even the engine startup sequence was different, quieter, smoother, more like awakening a sleeping predator than firing up conventional turbofan engines. "Ghost Rider, this is Control," came a voice through her helmet comm system. "You are cleared for departure on Vector 090, flight level Angels 20. Weather is clear, visibility unlimited. You are cleared to engage training protocols at pilot discretion." Training protocols. The euphemism covered a multitude of activities that would never appear in official flight records. Raven acknowledged the clearance and began her taxi toward the runway, nodding that the aircraft's movement felt different than any fighter she'd flown. The steering was more responsive, the braking more precise, as if the entire machine had been tuned to respond to pilot input with minimal delay. The runway stretched ahead of her like a pathway to redemption or destruction. Behind her, Marcus Thorne watched from the control tower, his expression unreadable through the tinted glass. To her left and right, empty hangars waited like monuments to aircraft that had never officially existed and missions that had never officially happened. "Ghost Rider, you are cleared for takeoff. Wind is calm, altimeter 29907. Have a good flight." She pushed the throttles forward and felt the aircraft respond with power that pressed her back into the ejection seat. The acceleration was smoother than any fighter she'd ever flown, as if the engines had been designed to minimize noise and maximize efficiency. The wheels left the runway with a sensation of floating, rather than the usual violent transition from ground to air. As she climbed through the morning sky, Raven felt something she hadn't experienced in 6 months: the pure joy of flight. The modified F-16 responded to her inputs like an extension of her own body, turning and climbing with precision that bordered on the supernatural. For the first time since Prophet's death, she remembered why she'd fallen in love with aviation. But as the altimeter climbed through 20,000 feet and she turned toward the coordinates Thorne had provided, she also remembered why flying was dangerous. Every pilot carried the weight of their aircraft, their mission, and their decisions. Every flight was a balance between capability and responsibility, between what was possible and what was right. The sky ahead stretched endlessly blue, broken only by wisps of clouds that looked like scattered thoughts. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay Syrian airspace, Russian air defenses, and the mystery of who had conducted a precision strike mission that had left 12 people dead and international tensions stretched to the breaking point. Raven checked her flight instruments and settled into the rhythm that had sustained her through hundreds of previous missions. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it the way Prophet had taught her, with skill, courage, and the understanding that some decisions could only be made by the pilot in the cockpit. The modified F-16 cut through the sky like a silver arrow, carrying her toward answers that would change everything she thought she knew about loyalty, duty, and the true meaning of her call sign. The Mediterranean Sea stretched below like hammered steel, its surface broken only by the wakes of merchant vessels and fishing boats that looked like toys from 35,000 feet. Raven had been airborne for 2 hours, following a flight path that took her north along the Turkish coast before turning east toward Syria. The modified F-16's engines ran so quietly that she sometimes forgot she was flying a single-seat fighter rather than gliding on thermal currents. "Ghost Rider, this is Overwatch," came a new voice through her comm system, female, professional, with the kind of calm that suggested years of experience managing high-stress situations. "We have you on scope, tracking nominal. Begin descent to flight level 150 and proceed to Waypoint Alpha." Waypoint Alpha appeared on her navigation display as a set of coordinates 40 miles off the Syrian coast. The area was international waters, technically neutral territory where aircraft from multiple nations conducted routine patrols. But Raven's mission briefing had made clear that nothing about this flight was routine. As she descended through 20,000 feet, her radar warning receiver began picking up signals from ground-based air defense systems. Syrian S-300 missiles, Russian S-400 systems, and older Soviet-era equipment created a complex web of overlapping coverage that extended well beyond Syrian territorial waters. Flying through this area required precise navigation and intimate knowledge of radar blind spots. "Overwatch, Ghost Rider. I'm picking up multiple SAM sites, bearing 040 through 120. Recommend approach vector 270 to minimize exposure." "Negative, Ghost Rider. Maintain current heading. We need to evaluate your detectability using the same approach route as our unknown aircraft." The response confirmed what Raven had suspected. This wasn't just a training exercise. Someone wanted to understand how an aircraft had penetrated Syrian airspace 3 nights ago without being detected by some of the most advanced air defense systems in the world. The implication was that either the mystery pilot possessed skills beyond normal human capability, or the aircraft itself had capabilities that defied conventional understanding. At 15,000 feet, she engaged the F-16 stealth systems according to the checklist Thorne had provided. The aircraft's electronic signature changed immediately. Radar returns that had been strong and clear became intermittent and difficult to track. The heads-up display showed her radar cross-section shrinking to almost nothing, as if the aircraft were becoming invisible to electronic detection. "Ghost Rider, Overwatch. Your signature is now minimal on our screens. Proceed to Waypoint Bravo and begin low-level approach." Waypoint Bravo placed her 20 miles from the Syrian coast, well within the engagement envelope of land-based missiles, but still in international airspace. The flight plan called for her to drop to 500 feet above sea level and approach the coastline using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to avoid detection. As she descended toward the wave tops, Raven felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that accompanied every high-risk mission. The modified F-16 handled the low-level flight with stability that impressed her. Most fighters became difficult to control at high speeds and low altitudes, but this aircraft seemed designed for exactly this kind of flying. At 500 feet, the Mediterranean became a blur of blue-green water that stretched to the horizon. Fishing boats appeared and disappeared beneath her wings in seconds, their crews probably unaware that a stealth fighter had just passed overhead. The coast of Syria emerged from the haze like a brown line drawn against the sky, backed by mountains that rose into clouds. Ghost Rider, you are approaching Syrian territorial waters. Maintain current altitude and heading. We are monitoring Syrian air defense networks for any reaction to your approach. The next few minutes would determine whether the F-16 stealth capabilities were as advanced as Thorne claimed. If Syrian radar operators detected her approach, she would face a choice between completing the mission or aborting to avoid international incident. Either option carried consequences that extended far beyond her personal career. The coastline rushed toward her at 400 knots, details resolving from abstract shapes into recognizable features. Sandy beaches gave way to rocky cliffs, fishing villages to military installations, civilian infrastructure to the unmistakable geometry of air defense systems. Through her helmet display, target markers appeared over every significant military installation within 50 miles of her position. Overwatch, Ghost Rider. I have visual on multiple SAM sites, naval installations, and what appears to be a forward airbase. No indication of radar lock or missile tracking. Stealth systems appear to be functioning as advertised. Copy, Ghost Rider. Proceed inland to Waypoint Charlie. Your target is the facility that was attacked 3 nights ago. We need visual confirmation of damage assessment and any signs of ongoing activity. Waypoint Charlie was 30 miles inland, in mountainous terrain that would provide natural concealment, but also increase the risk of controlled flight into terrain. Flying at 500 feet above ground level in unfamiliar territory required constant attention to navigation and obstacle avoidance. One moment of inattention could result in collision with terrain, buildings, or power lines. As she crossed the beach and began following a valley that led into the Syrian interior, Raven activated the aircraft's terrain-following radar and advanced navigation systems. The F-16 responded by automatically adjusting its altitude to maintain safe clearance above the ground, rising and falling with the terrain like a bird of prey hunting at dawn. The landscape below was a mixture of ancient and modern, agricultural terraces carved into hillsides thousands of years ago, interspersed with roads, power lines, and military installations that represented Syria's attempts to maintain sovereignty in a region dominated by more powerful neighbors. Villages appeared and disappeared beneath her wings, their residents probably unaware that their country's airspace had been violated by an aircraft that officially didn't exist. Ghost Rider, Overwatch. Syrian air defense networks show no reaction to your penetration. You are currently invisible to their radar systems. Proceed to target area and begin reconnaissance. The chemical weapons facility appeared in her cockpit display as a complex of buildings surrounded by security fences and guard towers. From altitude, it looked like any industrial installation. Warehouses, administrative buildings, and support facilities arranged around a central courtyard. Only the unusual security measures and the presence of specialized equipment suggested its true purpose. But as she approached at low level, the signs of the recent attack became unmistakable. 2 buildings had been completely destroyed, their roofs collapsed, and walls reduced to rubble. A third structure showed significant damage from what appeared to be precision-guided munitions. Emergency vehicles were still present, along with cleanup crews working to remove debris and assess the extent of the damage. Overwatch, Ghost Rider. I have eyes on target. Confirm 2 buildings completely destroyed, 1 severely damaged. Emergency response is ongoing. I count approximately 30 personnel on site, including what appear to be hazmat teams and military security. Copy, Ghost Rider. Can you identify the method of attack? Crater patterns, ordnance fragments, anything that might indicate the type of weapons used. Raven banked the F-16 into a gentle turn that allowed her to observe the damage from multiple angles. The destruction pattern was precise and professional. Each building had been hit by multiple weapons that had penetrated to the most vulnerable points of the structures. There were no missed targets, no collateral damage to unintended buildings, and no signs of defensive measures that had successfully intercepted incoming weapons. Overwatch, the attack was conducted with surgical precision. I see evidence of at least 6 separate impact points, all on high-value targets. No evidence of defensive success or pilot error. Whoever conducted this mission knew exactly what they were targeting and had the skills to hit it despite sophisticated air defenses. The implication hung in the radio silence that followed. Someone had successfully penetrated Syrian airspace, destroyed specific targets within a heavily defended chemical weapons facility, and withdrawn without detection by Syrian, Russian, or Turkish air defense networks. The mission required capabilities that few military organizations possessed and skills that even fewer pilots had mastered. As she completed her reconnaissance and turned back toward the coast, Raven began to understand why Marcus Thorne had sought her out specifically. The profile of the mystery mission matched capabilities that appeared in her own flight records: low-level penetration, precision targeting, and the ability to operate successfully in heavily defended airspace. Someone wanted to know if she was capable of conducting similar missions, and if so, whether she might be willing to do so under circumstances that would never appear in official records. The flight back to international waters passed without incident, but Raven's mind raced with questions that had no easy answers. The modified F-16 had performed flawlessly, its stealth and electronic warfare systems providing protection that surpassed anything she'd experienced in conventional aircraft. But the mission itself raised issues that extended beyond technical capabilities into the realm of politics, ethics, and the complex relationships between allies and enemies in the modern Middle East. Ghost Rider Overwatch, you are cleared to return to base. Your mission is complete. Well done. The words carried approval that she hadn't heard in 6 months, but they also carried implications that she was only beginning to understand. As she climbed toward cruising altitude and turned west toward the unmarked airfield where this had all begun, Raven considered the possibility that her career was about to take a direction that she had never imagined. The sun was setting over the Mediterranean as she approached the coast, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded her why she had fallen in love with flying in the first place. But beneath the beauty lay questions about duty, loyalty, and the price of redemption in a world where the lines between right and wrong were increasingly difficult to distinguish. Whatever Marcus Thorne had planned, whatever role he wanted her to play in missions that didn't officially exist, she would need to make decisions that would define the rest of her career and possibly the rest of her life. The airfield appeared on the horizon like a promise of answers and complications in equal measure. The debriefing room felt smaller than it had that morning, dominated now by maps, photographs, and the weight of Raven's reconnaissance report. Marcus Thorne sat across from her, his dress whites replaced by civilian clothes that made him look more like a corporate executive than a Navy SEAL. Behind him, 3 large monitors displayed real-time satellite imagery of the Syrian facility she had just photographed. "Your flight performance was flawless," he began, consulting notes from a tablet that hadn't been present during their earlier meeting. "Syrian air defense networks recorded no anomalous activity during your penetration and withdrawal. Russian monitoring stations detected minor atmospheric disturbances that they attributed to weather phenomena. Turkish radar operators reported normal commercial and military traffic patterns." Raven remained silent, waiting for the information that would explain why her successful mission felt more like the beginning of a larger operation than the conclusion of a training exercise. The satellite imagery showed cleanup crews still working at the chemical facility, their movements tracked with precision that suggested continuous surveillance. "The reconnaissance data you collected confirms our assessment of the original attack," Thorne continued. 6 precision weapons, delivered with accuracy that suggests advanced targeting systems and pilot skills at the extreme end of human capability. The question is whether this represents a new operational capability by a known adversary or the emergence of an unknown player. Unknown player, Raven asked. Someone with access to advanced aircraft, sophisticated weapons, and pilots trained to standards that rival our own special operations units. He gestured toward the monitors, where technical analysis data scrolled past in columns of numbers and measurements. The attack profile matches capabilities that exist in only a handful of military organizations worldwide. Most of them are allies. The implication was clear without being stated directly. If the attack had been conducted by an ally, it represented either a rogue operation or a breakdown in coordination that threatened regional stability. If it had been conducted by an adversary, it suggested capabilities that changed the strategic balance in the Middle East. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Thorne smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I need someone who can think like the pilot who conducted that mission. Someone who understands the technical requirements, the tactical challenges, and the psychological pressures of operating alone in hostile territory." The request sounded reasonable, but Raven had enough experience with classified operations to recognize when she was being recruited rather than consulted. "You want me to develop counter-tactics. I want you to join a team that will ensure this type of attack never happens again." He stood and walked to a wall-mounted map that showed the entire Middle East region. The facility that was destroyed was manufacturing chemical weapons that were supposed to have been eliminated under international agreements. The attack prevented those weapons from being delivered to terrorist organizations that would have used them against civilian populations. The moral complexity of the situation crystallized in Raven's mind like ice forming on aircraft wings. Someone had violated Syrian sovereignty to destroy weapons that could have killed thousands of innocent people. The attack itself was illegal under international law, but its results had potentially prevented mass casualties that would have dwarfed the 12 deaths at the facility. "You're asking me to condone vigilante operations," she said. "I'm asking you to prevent the need for vigilante operations by ensuring that similar facilities are identified and neutralized through appropriate channels before they become operational." Thorne returned to his seat, his expression serious. "The team I'm assembling will conduct reconnaissance and intelligence gathering missions that support official diplomatic and military responses to chemical weapons proliferation. Off the books, with full government authorization through channels that don't require public disclosure or congressional oversight." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to conversation level. "Lieutenant Commander, your country needs pilots who can operate in gray areas where traditional rules of engagement don't apply. The world has become too complex for simple military solutions." The offer represented everything Raven had lost 6 months earlier: the opportunity to fly advanced aircraft on challenging missions that served national security interests. But it also represented a departure from the military structure that had defined her career, moving into a world where success was measured by results rather than adherence to regulation. "What happened to the pilot who conducted the original mission?" she asked. "Unknown. The aircraft disappeared from all tracking systems after completing its attack run. No distress signals, no emergency landings, no debris recovery. Either the pilot successfully evaded all surveillance assets in the region, or he left the sentence unfinished. Or they didn't make it home. The possibility exists." Thorne's expression remained neutral, but Raven caught a flicker of something that might have been respect or concern. High-risk missions carry high-risk consequences. That's why we need pilots who understand the stakes and can accept the responsibility. The room fell silent except for the hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of aircraft operations from the main base. Raven stared at the satellite imagery, thinking about Prophet's last transmission and the choice she'd made to save civilian lives instead of following military protocol. The decision had cost her career in conventional aviation, but it had also proven that she could make life-and-death choices under extreme pressure. "I need guarantees," she said finally. "Such as, if I join this team, I want full disclosure about mission objectives, target selection criteria, and rules of engagement. I want to know who's making the decisions and what oversight exists to prevent abuse." She met his gaze steadily. "And I want assurance that civilian casualties will be minimized to the greatest extent possible." Thorne nodded slowly. "Those are reasonable requests. The answers might surprise you." "Try me." He activated a secure communication system that connected them to a video conference with participants whose faces were obscured by digital encryption. The voice that emerged from the speakers was electronically altered, but clearly belonged to someone accustomed to command authority. "Lieutenant Commander Delacroix," the voice began, "your service record indicates exemplary performance until the Persian Gulf incident 6 months ago. Your decision to prioritize civilian lives over military objectives resulted in official censure, but also demonstrated judgment that our organization values highly." "What organization?" Raven asked. "A joint task force composed of intelligence and military personnel from allied nations. Our mission is to identify and neutralize threats to international security that fall outside the scope of conventional military or diplomatic responses." The voice paused. "The chemical weapons facility you reconnoitered today was destroyed by one of our operational teams after diplomatic efforts to secure its closure failed." The admission confirmed Raven's suspicions while raising new questions about the scope and authority of the organization Thorne represented. "You're telling me the United States government authorized an attack on Syrian territory?" "We're telling you that preventing chemical weapons from reaching terrorist organizations sometimes requires actions that cannot be acknowledged publicly," another voice said, this one female, with an accent that suggested European origin. "The 12 casualties at that facility were regrettable but minimal compared to the thousands who would have died if those weapons had been completed and deployed." Raven absorbed the information while studying Thorne's expression for signs of deception or manipulation. His face revealed nothing, but she sensed genuine conviction behind his professional demeanor. Whatever this organization represented, its members believed they were serving a greater good that transcended traditional boundaries of law and sovereignty. "What would my role be?" she asked. "Initially, reconnaissance and intelligence gathering using advanced aircraft and stealth technology," the first voice replied. "Eventually, possibly direct action missions against high-value targets that threaten international security. All operations would be conducted under strict rules of engagement designed to minimize civilian casualties and collateral damage." "And if I refuse?" "You return to your current assignment with no consequences and no further contact from our organization," Thorne said. "Your participation must be voluntary and complete. Reluctant operators are ineffective and dangerous." The honesty was refreshing after 6 months of bureaucratic doublespeak and administrative punishment. Whatever faults this organization might have, its representatives were willing to discuss the realities of their operations rather than hiding behind euphemisms and classifications. "I need time to consider," Raven said. "You have 24 hours," the female voice replied. "After that, the offer expires and the opportunity passes to other candidates." The video conference ended, leaving Raven alone with Thorne in a room that suddenly felt charged with possibility and danger. Outside, she could hear the sound of conventional military aircraft conducting normal training operations. FA-18 Hornets practicing carrier landings, C-130 Hercules running cargo missions, helicopters conducting search and rescue exercises. The routine activities of a military that operated within established rules and acknowledged boundaries. "Questions?" Thorne asked. "Hundreds, but they all come down to one. Am I ready to become someone who operates outside the system that trained me? That's a question only you can answer. He stood and gathered his materials. But consider this. The system that trained you also grounded you for making a moral choice under pressure. Sometimes operating outside the system is the only way to serve the values the system is supposed to protect. After he left, Raven remained in the debriefing room for another hour, studying the satellite imagery and flight data from her reconnaissance mission. The modified F-16 had performed beyond her expectations, its stealth and electronic warfare capabilities providing protection that conventional aircraft couldn't match. Flying it had reminded her of the pure joy of aviation, the seamless integration of human skill and advanced technology that represented the pinnacle of military aviation. But the mission itself had also demonstrated the ethical complexities of modern warfare, where precision weapons could eliminate specific targets while leaving nearby buildings untouched, where chemical weapons facilities operated under international law while preparing to supply terrorist organizations, and where allied governments authorized operations that they could never acknowledge publicly. As she walked back to her quarters, Raven passed the memorial wall where Prophet's name gleamed under fluorescent lights. Lieutenant Jacob, Prophet, Morrison had died because he chose to protect civilian lives from hostile action. The Syrian chemical facility had been destroyed to prevent chemical weapons from reaching terrorist organizations that would have used them against civilians. The parallel was uncomfortable but undeniable. Her quarters looked smaller than usual, dominated by the flight suit she'd worn on the reconnaissance mission and the classified materials Thorne had left for her review. Technical specifications for the modified F-16, target folders for facilities in Syria, Iran, and North Korea, and personnel files for other pilots who had been recruited for similar operations. One file caught her attention: Lieutenant Sarah Wraith Chen, a former Air Force pilot who had been officially killed in action over Afghanistan 2 years earlier, but whose photograph showed her wearing civilian clothes at an airfield that looked suspiciously like the one where Raven had flown the stealth mission. The implication was clear. Joining this organization meant abandoning her official identity and accepting a new existence outside the normal military structure. The decision would define the rest of her life, determining whether she spent her remaining years mopping floors and filing reports, or flying the most advanced aircraft in the world on missions that served national security interests. But it would also determine what kind of person she became: someone who accepted boundaries imposed by bureaucracy and politics, or someone who was willing to cross those boundaries in service of larger principles. She opened Prophet's letter and read it again, focusing on the words that had sustained her through 6 months of professional exile. "We fly so others don't have to." The chemical weapons at the Syrian facility would have killed innocent people if they had reached their intended recipients. The pilot who destroyed that facility had prevented those deaths, even at the cost of violating international law and risking capture or death in hostile territory. The choice Prophet would have made was clear. Dawn was breaking over the base when Raven made her decision. She dressed in her service uniform, pinned her wings and ribbons in perfect alignment, and walked across the tarmac to Building 47. The security guard recognized her and nodded professionally as she passed through the checkpoint and descended to Sublevel 3. Marcus Thorne was waiting in the same conference room, now dressed in flight gear identical to what she had worn on the reconnaissance mission. Behind him, the wall-mounted displays showed real-time satellite imagery of several facilities in different countries, each one marked with indicators that suggested ongoing surveillance and target assessment. "I assume your presence indicates acceptance," he said. "On one condition," she replied. "I want to know the identity of the pilot who conducted the original Syrian mission." Thorne smiled, but there was sadness in it. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, call sign Wraith, former Air Force, recruited 18 months ago after her official death was staged to extract her from a compromised operation in Afghanistan. She conducted the Syrian mission 3 nights ago and died when her aircraft suffered catastrophic failure during the withdrawal phase. The revelation hit Raven like turbulence, sudden and disorienting. The woman in the classified photograph had been real, had flown the mission that started this recruitment process, and had paid the ultimate price for crossing boundaries that conventional military operations couldn't cross. Her sacrifice prevented chemical weapons from reaching terrorist organizations that would have used them against civilian populations, Thorne continued. She died as she lived, protecting innocent people from those who would do them harm. Raven thought about Prophet's death, about the choice she'd made in the Persian Gulf, and about the pilot who had died completing a mission that served the same principles Prophet had died defending. The connections formed a pattern that transcended individual careers and personal ambitions. "When do I start?" she asked. "Now," Thorne replied, activating the secure communication system that connected them to the mysterious voices from the previous day. "Welcome to Task Force Nightfall, Lieutenant Commander. Your call sign has just become operational." The irony wasn't lost on her. The call sign that had defined her identity as a conventional naval aviator would now define her identity as someone who operated in the shadows between official policy and moral necessity. Nightfall, the time when darkness provided concealment for operations that couldn't be conducted in daylight, when skilled pilots used advanced technology to accomplish missions that served larger purposes than personal advancement or bureaucratic efficiency. As the voice from the secure communication system began outlining her first official mission, Raven felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that accompanied every significant transition in her career. But this time, the transition represented more than just a new assignment. It represented a fundamental change in how she understood her role as a military pilot and her responsibility to protect innocent people from those who would harm them. The modified F-16 was waiting in its hangar, sleek and deadly and beautiful in the fluorescent lighting. Beside it, ground crews were preparing additional aircraft for missions that would never appear in official records, but would prevent catastrophes that could never be allowed to occur. Prophet's words echoed in her memory as she walked toward her new aircraft and her new life. "We fly so others don't have to." For the first time in 6 months, Raven Nightfall Delacroix felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The first official mission briefing took place in a conference room that existed in the gap between floors, accessible only through an elevator that required biometric identification and security clearances that didn't appear in any government database. Raven sat at a table with 5 other pilots, each one officially dead according to military records, but very much alive according to the classified personnel files that Thorne distributed with practiced efficiency. "Task Force Nightfall operates under a simple mandate," he began, activating wall-mounted displays that showed global threat assessments and target priorities. "We identify and neutralize threats to international security that fall outside the scope of conventional military or diplomatic responses. Our authority derives from a joint intelligence agreement between allied nations, and our operations are conducted with precision that minimizes civilian casualties and collateral damage." The other pilots represented a cross-section of military aviation excellence, former Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, and international personnel who had been recruited after demonstrating exceptional skills and questionable judgment. Their official deaths had been carefully staged to extract them from compromised operations or bureaucratic situations that prevented them from serving effectively within normal military structures. Captain Elena Phantom Vasquez had been a Marine Corps pilot who died in a helicopter crash that had actually been a cover for her extraction from a hostage rescue operation that went sideways. Major David Ghost Thompson was an Air Force pilot who had been shot down over Iraq and posthumously awarded the Silver Star, despite currently sitting 3 chairs away from Raven and reviewing target folders for chemical weapons facilities in Iran. Each of you was selected because you demonstrated the ability to make difficult moral choices under extreme pressure, Thorne continued. Your previous decisions to prioritize civilian lives or larger strategic objectives over immediate military protocols indicate psychological profiles that match our operational requirements. The briefing included technical specifications for aircraft that officially didn't exist, weapons systems that had been developed in black programs funded by intelligence budgets, and targeting procedures that emphasized precision and minimized the risk of civilian casualties. Every aspect of their operations was designed to achieve specific objectives while maintaining plausible deniability for the governments that authorized their missions. Questions? Thorne asked. Rules of engagement, said Ghost Thompson. What happens if we encounter civilian aircraft or personnel during mission execution? Civilian protection takes absolute priority, Thorne replied immediately. Mission abort is authorized and expected if civilian casualties cannot be avoided through alternative tactics or timing adjustments. Our effectiveness depends on maintaining moral legitimacy in operations that exist outside normal legal frameworks. Phantom Vasquez raised her hand. Command structure and decision-making authority. Each mission is planned and authorized by a joint committee that includes intelligence and military representatives from participating nations. Individual pilots retain tactical decision-making authority during mission execution, including the authority to abort if conditions change in ways that compromise mission objectives or civilian safety. The questions continued for another hour, covering everything from equipment maintenance to emergency extraction procedures. But underlying every technical discussion was the fundamental question of whether military personnel could operate effectively outside the legal and ethical frameworks that had governed their previous careers. For Raven, the answer had already been determined by Prophet's death and the choice she'd made in the Persian Gulf. Conventional military structures had failed to protect innocent civilians from chemical weapons attacks and had punished pilots who prioritized civilian lives over bureaucratic procedures. Task Force Nightfall offered an alternative that served the same moral principles through different operational methods. After the briefing, she found herself alone with Marcus Thorne in the corridor outside the conference room. The other pilots had dispersed to their quarters or training facilities, leaving them to discuss the personal implications of her recruitment. Regrets? He asked. Questions? She replied, starting with how long I can expect to survive in this job. Average operational career is 18 months, he said without hesitation. Some pilots last longer, others shorter, depending on mission assignments and luck. Sarah Chen completed 12 missions before the Syrian operation that killed her. The statistics were sobering but not surprising. Pilots who flew stealth penetration missions into hostile territory faced risks that extended beyond normal combat operations. Electronic warfare, surface-to-air missiles, and mechanical failures could all prove fatal when operating alone in areas where rescue was impossible. What happens to pilots who survive long enough to retire? She asked. New identities, financial security, and the satisfaction of knowing they served something larger than themselves. Thorne's expression remained neutral. Also psychological counseling and medical support for whatever physical or emotional damage they accumulate during their operational careers. And if I want out before then? Same new identity package, plus a cover story that explains your official death and resurrection. He smiled grimly. But pilots who leave early tend to struggle with civilian life. Flying milk runs on commercial aircraft or instructing student pilots doesn't provide the same sense of purpose as preventing chemical weapons attacks. The conversation was interrupted by an alarm that echoed through the underground facility. 3 short blasts followed by a computerized voice announcing Priority Alpha Mission Authorization. Other pilots began moving toward their quarters with practiced efficiency, gathering gear and checking equipment with the smooth coordination of personnel who had rehearsed emergency procedures extensively. "What's Priority Alpha?" Raven asked. "Imminent threat requiring immediate response," Thorne replied, already walking toward the elevator. "Congratulations, Nightfall. Your first operational mission starts now." The mission briefing was conducted, while ground crews prepared her aircraft and intelligence analysts updated target information in real time. A chemical weapons facility in North Korea had begun final production procedures for nerve agents that satellite imagery suggested would be delivered to terrorist organizations within 72 hours. Diplomatic efforts to halt the operation had been unsuccessful, and conventional military strikes were impossible due to the facility's location near civilian population centers. "Single aircraft penetration," Thorne explained, showing her approach routes that avoided North Korean air defense systems. "Precision strikes on 3 specific buildings, withdrawal through predetermined corridors, total mission time approximately 4 hours." The target information included detailed plans of the facility, guard schedules, and civilian population data that emphasized the importance of precise timing and accurate weapons delivery. The buildings she would destroy contained chemical weapons production equipment, but nearby structures housed administrative personnel and maintenance workers who had no connection to the weapons program. "Weather?" she asked, studying meteorological data that showed cloud cover and wind patterns over the target area. "Marginal but acceptable. Low cloud ceiling will provide concealment during approach, but visibility during the attack phase will be limited." Thorne indicated wind direction and speed measurements. "Crosswinds will complicate precision bombing, but your aircraft's targeting systems can compensate for atmospheric conditions." Raven absorbed the technical information while considering the moral implications of the mission. 12 people had died during the Syrian attack that Sarah Chen had conducted, all of them directly involved in chemical weapons production. The North Korean facility presented a more complex situation, with civilian personnel working alongside military and scientific staff who were developing weapons for terrorist use. "Collateral damage assessment?" she asked. "Minimal if weapons are delivered precisely to designated target points," came the reply from the secure communication system. "Extensive if targeting accuracy is compromised by weather, equipment malfunction, or pilot error." The blunt assessment reinforced the reality of her new role. Success would be measured by her ability to destroy specific targets while avoiding civilian casualties, even under conditions that tested the limits of human skill and aircraft performance. Failure would result in international incidents that could escalate into larger conflicts. As she walked toward the hangar where her aircraft waited, Raven thought about Prophet's letter and the words that had guided her decision to join Task Force Nightfall. "We fly so others don't have to." The nerve agents being produced at the North Korean facility would eventually kill innocent people if they reached their intended recipients. Her mission was to prevent those deaths by eliminating the weapons before they could be deployed. The modified F-16 sat under bright lights like a metallic predator, its stealth-enhanced surfaces reflecting the hurried activity of ground crews performing final pre-flight inspections. Advanced weapons hung beneath its wings, precision-guided munitions designed to destroy specific targets with minimal collateral damage. As she strapped herself into the cockpit and began the engine start sequence, Raven felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and responsibility that accompanied every significant mission. But this time, the responsibility extended beyond her aircraft and her own survival to include civilian lives that would be protected or endangered by the accuracy of her weapons delivery. The runway stretched ahead of her like a pathway to redemption, challenge, and the opportunity to serve principles that transcended bureaucratic boundaries and political considerations. Whatever dangers lay ahead in North Korean airspace, she would face them the same way she had faced every other challenge in her career, with skill, determination, and the understanding that some missions could only be accomplished by pilots who were willing to accept responsibility for their consequences. The tower cleared her for takeoff into a night sky scattered with stars that provided no navigation aid, but reminded her that she was part of something larger than individual ambition or personal survival. As the F-16's wheels left the runway and she climbed toward the darkness that had given her the call sign Nightfall, Raven Nightfall, Delacroix finally understood that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Flying toward danger in service of principles that mattered more than regulations, career advancement, or the approval of people who would never understand the choices that real pilots made when everything else failed. The mission was just beginning, and she was ready.